Welcome back to Carlucci Auditorium. So we've reached the closing plenary in our second annual dialogue on war legacies and peace in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. Thanks to everyone who's joined all the roundtables and sessions today. For me, the only regret is that I could only be in one of the roundtables at a time and wasn't in the others that were concurrent, but I'm sure I will hear about it from those participants. We have saved some of the most compelling presenters for the last session, and several of them have recently arrived back from Vietnam.
Ngài đại sứ mới từ trở lại Việt Nam. Và cũng người khác gần đây đã đi lại từ những nơi khác đến đây. Khi chúng tôi trao đổi về vấn đề buổi khai mạc, chúng tôi có nhiều nhóm khác nhau và thời gian thì tương đối ngắn. Và chúng tôi muốn cố gắng trước khi 5 giờ như dự định. Cái phiên họp bế mạc hôm nay là để những cái tiếp theo trong những vấn đề mà khôi phục những cái việc mà hậu quả chiến tranh, khắc phục hậu quả chiến tranh và xây dựng hòa bình. Và tiếp theo những cái ý tưởng của ngài là Lai Hy. Chúng tôi muốn biết được làm sao đạt được đến ngày hôm nay, làm sao chúng ta bước tiếp theo là gì giữa đất nước và con người dân của chúng ta. Chúng tôi rất hân hạnh giới thiệu ngài đại sứ Mark Nepper là người đại sứ đặc biệt toàn quyền của Hoa Kỳ tại Việt Nam. Ngài đã làm việc là phó trợ lý ngoại trưởng cũng như là trong làm việc ở Việt Nam, và ngài nói chuyện cả tiếng Việt rất là giỏi. Ngài đã tham gia cùng với sự kiện gần đây với ngài Tổng thống Biden. Ngài ở đây để chia sẻ những câu chuyện của chúng ta. Cùng với đó, chúng ta ngài Thượng tướng Nguyễn Văn Rinh là người chủ tịch vấn đề về tổ chức VAVA, tổ chức về nạn nhân chất độc màu da cam. Ngài thì có rất nhiều kinh nghiệm, là chủ tịch của VAVA, là người thành viên của Ban Mặt trận Tổ quốc Việt Nam và thành viên đại diện Quốc hội của Việt Nam khi mà ngài nghỉ hưu. Chúng tôi có tiến sĩ Phạm Lan Dung là quyền hiệu trưởng quyền Học viện Ngoại giao Việt Nam, trực thuộc Bộ Ngoại giao. Bà cũng là phó chủ tịch của Hiệp hội Xã hội về luật và tổng thư ký chủ tịch của Việt Nam. Bà Dung có bằng tiến sĩ và bằng cao học về DAV và trường của quốc tế. Chúng tôi xin chào mừng 3 người. Chúng tôi xin mời ngài đại sứ Mark Nepper.
USIP for putting this together. I really appreciate the invitation to join you today. I apologize for only being able to make this last session. It sounds like you had some very interesting sessions yesterday, including with our colleague at the NSC, Dr. Mira Rapp-Hooper, this morning with Senator Jeff Merkley, of course, who's emerged as an incredibly strong supporter of the U.S.-Vietnam relationship. But I guess before I begin, I would like to just note the passing of General Wen Chi-ving, and of course someone who had contributed so much to our two countries' relationship over many years, including the reconciliation between our two nations, and so certainly have my and our government's condolences on his passing. But I just, as Andrew alluded, I just flew in from Hanoi after being there for I think no one could argue was an incredibly successful visit by President Biden. We use the word historic and milestone and momentous a lot. I mean, it often, it's become like a cliche when we talk about a big visit like this, or like a bumper sticker. But in reality, this truly was a historic, momentous milestone in our two countries' ties. We started off this year thinking, how best can we commemorate 10 years of the U.S.-Vietnam Comprehensive Partnership? And and certainly, we wanted to look back, reflect on just how far we've come for the past 10 years, and virtually any area you can think of, trade and investment, science, technology, defense and security, education, training, people-to-people ties, cultural ties, you name it. If it's worth doing, the U.S. and Vietnam have been doing it, and doing it, on a growing basis, a growing trajectory every year for the last 10 years. And I think as a reflection of the consequence with which Washington looks at the U.S.-Vietnam relationship, we've had a lot of senior visitors this year. 1/4 of the U.S. cabinet, the president's cabinet, has visited Vietnam this year. And this was even before we were discussing the idea of the president coming. We had, of course, the USS Ronald Reagan visited. We had senior congressional delegations, to include that led by Senator Merkley on the Democratic side, Senator Crapo on the Republican side, not too long after. We had the largest business mission ever to Vietnam, put together by U.S.-ASEAN Business Council back in May. So, this year was already shaping up to be a pretty special one in terms of our two countries' joint commemoration, again, of the 10th anniversary of the Comprehensive Partnership. But then we were able to work things out with our friends, of course, under the leadership of the White House and the National Security Council, but working very closely with our Vietnamese partners. We were able to arrange the visit by the President, September 10th and 11th, which heralded the announcement of an upgrade, not just one level, but two, as you all know. Jumping from comprehensive partnership to comprehensive strategic partnership, and skipping the middle rung of strategic partnership altogether, which is unprecedented. This has never happened before. But I think it's as strong a reflection as possible of, again, I think the consequence that both of our leaders, both of our countries, put into this bilateral relationship. This upgrade, significant upgrade, is a reflection of where our two countries already are in terms of our cooperative relationship, but it's also a reflection of our strong will about where we want to go next, and how we can either deepen already existing cooperation even more, or expand into new and novel and exciting areas going forward. I think you saw, as part of the documents that came out from the visit, the fact sheet that the White House put out, but of course the joint statement that the U.S. and Vietnam put out together, a very strong focus on very future-oriented efforts, whether it's working together to help Vietnam, to work with Vietnam on creating a innovation-based, sort of high-tech-centered economy, and to do this through education programs, training programs, workforce development, workforce accelerators, to help create the kind of workforce that Vietnam needs to address the challenges and the opportunities of the 21st century. And so we're very pleased that there were so many concrete announcements as part of this visit that will involve training and education, and really, the United States aligning itself with the very significant and ambitious goals that Vietnam itself has set for its future, whether it's to be a net zero carbon economy by 2050, whether it's to be a high income economy by 2045, whether it's to be a digital economy by 2030. These are all goals in which the United States is proud to be a partner of Vietnam, and I think either by intention, sometimes by accident, but regardless, with great focus, the United States and Vietnam have ended up being virtually on the same page for all of these things, and we're very pleased that we see ourselves as part of the future that Vietnam has set for itself. And so I think it's important to remember that the United States very much wants to be to partner with Vietnam, to deepen this partnership, to look for ways, again, that we can expand existing cooperation, but also look for new and exciting areas of new and different cooperation. But all the while all this was happening, and a lot of focus on high-tech cooperation, Prime Minister Pham Minh Chinh and President Biden met with tech leaders from both countries, including Vietnamese sort of name brands like VinFast, Vinigames, FPT, Momo, Vietnam Air, and I know I'm missing one, Bitexco, and they had great American companies as well, like Boeing, Amcor, Global Foundries, Marvell, which is a semiconductor maker. We had Intel there and Google. So again, trying to figure out ways our two countries' leading tech firms can work together to help usher the way forward for a future in which the United States and Vietnam are very, that our two economies are inextricably tied together. And I can't think, again, of a more public or more resounding way to show the world, to show our two countries, to show our two peoples, that the United States and Vietnam are moving forward shoulder to shoulder together in a future in which our fates are tied so closely. But as all this focus on the future was taking place, and I guess circling back to the theme of this last 2 days at this dialogue was, of course, the very strong recognition about the importance that reconciliation efforts have played in bringing our relationship to where it is today. Recognizing that our efforts at reconciliation predate even normalization. Of course, we're in the 28th year since normalization, but we just celebrated the 30th year of joint field activities between VNO SMP and DPAA. And not to mention all of the work we're doing, whether to address war legacy issues, whether it's the search for the ongoing search for missing American service members, and hopefully the accounting for them. Now the efforts underway to help Vietnam account for its own fallen through both archival research at Harvard University, and I know Tony's in the audience somewhere. Where are you, Tony? There he is. As well as DNA analysis, something led by our U.S. Agency for International Development. I saw Tony Kolb. There he is in the back. Thank you, Tony, for your efforts there. But also UXO remediation, led in part by the State Department, but also many different international groups like Peace Trees, excuse me, Peace Trees and Norwegian People's Aid and others. And then, of course, the Bien Hoa, the overall dioxin remediation effort, which successfully concluded at Da Nang a couple of years ago and is now underway at Bien Hoa. But all of these areas are areas in which the United States and Vietnam are working closely together. The United States is fully committed to seeing these through. And I think on the occasion of the President's visit, we had a very moving event in which you had a couple of American veterans who live in Vietnam, and you had a Vietnamese veteran come together, and we handed over the diary that belonged to this Vietnamese veteran. And at the same time, some items were handed over from the Vietnamese side to our side, personal items that had belonged to American soldiers that were being returned to us, as well as turning over archival research. Again, thanks to Harvard University, we handed that over to the Vietnamese side. And so really, so against the backdrop of this summit that was very focused on the future and high-tech cooperation, innovation, entrepreneurship, creativity, still there was this very strong recognition about the importance of ongoing efforts and cooperation to promote reconciliation, to continue to address war legacy issues. And this is something I think that we in the United States are certainly committed to going forward. And I would just conclude by saying the final event the President did before going to the airport, and I know many of you saw this in our own, where's Major Chung? He was part of this, there he is, was when the President visited the John McCain marker there by Chukpak Lake. I know we all know it. But again, very moving for him to go with Senator John Kerry to honor the memory of Senator McCain, and really that sort of tableau of the President with Senator Kerry in front of the marker to John McCain, and just the recognition that it took great courage on the part of, these two individuals, Republican and Democrat, but also joining hands with people of great courage in Vietnam, who at the same, around that time, Wen Katak and others, who strongly believed in the importance of reconciliation, the importance of trying to address issues related to the war, to try and normalize our relationship. And so I think it was very fitting. The President, on his way out of Hanoi, stopped there to acknowledge the role that John McCain played, again, honoring the past, but with a very, very clear vision and very strong focus on the future of our relationship. So I'll stop there. I've probably gone on too long, but it was, again, no overstatement to say this visit was truly historic, and it's truly an honor. Our Deputy Assistant Secretary, Melissa Brown, was there as well. We had fun putting that visit together. But yeah, it truly a once-in-a-lifetime experience. So thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to return to Washington, D.C. to attend the second dialogue on dual legacy and peace. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizing committee for inviting me to attend and speak at this dialogue. As you know, the dialogue on the consequences of war and peace, we cannot help but mention that the war history has been impacted with the image. We cannot forget to report about the history of war, which recorded many wars. Every war is very devastating, and the consequences is enormous. That causes a lot of damages in terms of people and assets. So many civil structures, the buildings, the agricultures, the cultures never be restored. The consequences of war are extremely huge. It is an obsession in the mind of every person. Remnants of war take many years for people to recover from the war-torn economy. In Vietnam, the chemical war was even more brutal. Even though the war has been over for nearly 50 years, the overcoming of the consequences of war is still somewhat that all warring parties must pay attention to. Vietnam has made great effort to heal the wounds of war, improving the environment, killing mice, and taking care of the people, provide the social policy. The legacy of the war has left Vietnam many sorrows, losses, and severe consequences for many generations of Vietnamese people. Recently, in the spirit of putting aside the past, look forward to the future, Vietnam and the U.S. has continued to promote more effectively and practical solutions to heal the wounds of the war. After 28 years of Vietnam's and U.S. normalization diplomatic relations and 10 years establishing the comprehensive partnership, September 10 September 2023, General Secretary of Communist Party of Vietnam and U.S. President Joe Biden signed an agreement to upgrade the relationship of the two countries to comprehensive strategic partnerships. The cooperation to overcome the consequences of war is considered the foundation of the two countries as contributing to the process of the reconciliation, building the trust between two countries, opening the new opportunities for cooperation. In that spirit, series of proposed projects has been being implemented, recognizing joint efforts in Vietnam and U.S. cooperation on overcoming the consequences of war, including the completion of the detoxification project in Da Nang, and continue to implement the Demining project in Bien Hoa at Bien Hoa Airport, and the project to support improving the quality of life of the people impacted with the Agent Orange. In 8 provinces, the project for communications on overcoming the post-war bomb, mines, and chemical agents. The U.S. and the Vietnamese government, U.S. government has sponsored a number of the programs for Vietnam for nearly 3 decades, with the purpose of cleaning the landmines, explosive materials, educating about the risk of mines and explosive materials. Although the U.S. government has provided aid to Vietnam, but that aid is still very modest compared to the consequences, the serious level of the consequences that the U.S. goes to the Vietnamese people. But the support and focus on the certain environmental issues, while the taking care of the people, of the life of the victims of Orange Agents and dioxin are still very limited. Many have passed away because they couldn't wait. They don't have time to wait. Actually, the pain of the consequences of war still haunts the living and have not been completely resolved. In the coming time, with the help from the U.S., Vietnam will to overcome the consequences of war and to be comparable with the new relationship between Vietnam and the U.S. in the new era. In this regard, I'd like to propose the following comments. Firstly, both sides need to build a comprehensive mechanism to resolve the consequences of war in a stable, long-term, and systematic way. Secondly, Vietnam hopes that the U.S. will continue to promote stronger cooperation in the fields of environmental treatment, overcoming the consequences of bombs and toxic chemical dioxins in Vietnam, mobilizing and committing resources to treat dioxin pollution at Bien Hoa Airport and Phu Quoc Airport, coordinate to evaluate the results of dioxin treatment at the ISEAS-Airport, A Lưới district in Thừa Thuyên, Huế province. Thirdly, continue effectively implement projects to support improving the quality of life of people with disability and victims of Orange Agent, and provide the additional resources to support the Orange Agent victims to improve their life, which has been visible. Fourthly, the U.S. government considers support construction of the dioxin analysis center and medical examination and treatment facilities, rehabilitation facility, and provision of medical and medical equipment to help victims of Orange Agent, to help them improve the life and prevent the inheritance and transformation to other generation. Fifthly, to promote communication focusing on implementation or displays of contents and cooperation between Vietnam and the U.S. to overcome the consequences of war and the chemical toxics. At the War Remains Museum in Ho Chi Minh City, and distributes and displays that in the A Lưới Airport. Sixthly, organize exchange visit, create the condition for young people with disability impacted by Orange Agent, in particular to support them to have more interaction with the U.S. American people, so that have more confidence and been the more love, they can learn and strive more for the better relationships. Ladies and gentlemen, as a country that have suffered the severe consequences of war, we always wish and call on countries to respect peace, not let war break out, and prohibit the research and use of chemicals and weapons, the weapons of mass destruction, so that our people, our humanity can live in the world of peace, stability, cooperation, and development. Thank you very much.
First of all, let me express my sincere thanks to the USIP for allowing me the opportunity to be here today. I remember during the first half day of the dialogue, Ambassador Ted also said that we has to be sincere about the past. We have to look at the past and tell the young generation what was going on between the two countries. Even though a lot of people do agree with his statement, we do understand that this is one of the tasks for education. I was asked by the organizer to talk about the role of education in conciliation. And we know that it is one of the main tasks of education is to help the young generation to understand better about the war. But we do have to acknowledge the fact that this is quite challenging for both sides, for the people from two countries to look at the war in the way that there is a sense of common understanding. There are still a lot of differences in the way people look at the war, and we have to acknowledge the fact that there are not two sides of the war, but three sides: the north of Vietnam, the south of Vietnam, and the US. After listening to so many discussions during our dialogue in 1.5 days, I understand that all of the project of the effort of this World Legacy project under the ISEAS has a very important role in helping people to understand each other, to understand each other's culture, history, and the way we look at the war. I heard about there was only 3 paragraphs in historic books for students here at the US about Vietnam War. And I heard that it has been improved recently, that nowadays a student in California spend at least 1 or 2 weeks to study about Vietnam wars. But I do believe that it's not enough. There are a lot need to be done in order for the war conciliation. However, we do know that there are positive sides. There are a lot of Vietnam studies program in almost all of the big US universities. And in Vietnam, the Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam is also one of the institutions that has the American Studies program. And we recently signed an MOU with the Columbia University to help each other to strengthen our American Studies program in Vietnam and Vietnam Studies in the US. So basically what I think in terms of education, even though there is still a lot of efforts need to be done in order to foster common understanding of the war, what education should aim to do is to help people understand of the devastating consequences of the war, and to help the two countries not to repeat the mistakes in the past. There is one very positive side of education exchange between the people to people. We may know that Vietnam ranks the 5th among countries who have the most many students in the US. We ranked only after China, India, Canada, and South Korea. The number of Vietnamese students in the US now is more than 30,000 students, and it is almost 1/6 of our overall students studying abroad. And the US ranks the 2nd after Australia in terms of destination for our students. It means something because for Vietnamese parents, children are their most valuable assets. So sending their children to study in a country is a very good signal of, willing for conciliation and getting over the war. I think that after what happened last Sunday, people said that we now enter a new chapter of our relationship, and what education, what is the aim of education in the comprehensive strategic partnership term. I think that this is very good time for education to be a leading factor in terms of helping the two countries to fulfill all of the objectives stated in the joint statement between the two leaders of the countries. And the keywords are high technology, semiconductor production, and digital innovation. So the cooperation between the two countries in terms of training of the high-tech workforce is one of the win-win solution for the two countries. And we know that that Vietnam can play some role in the semiconductor market, in the semiconductor production chain. But if we look at the example of Taiwan, it needs like at least 10 years for Taiwan to develop its high-tech workforce semiconductor engineers. So we are looking forward for the cooperation between the US and Vietnam in terms of helping our country to build up and to develop our high-tech workforce. And last but not least, there is a lot to be learned from the team of a strong supporter of the US-Vietnam relationship from both countries, and members of that team of the provocator for our relations are ambassadors of the US to Vietnam, including Ambassador Mark Napper. In the luncheon organized by our president to President Biden, we met with Ambassador Mark Napper, with Dan Crittenbrink, and many other Vietnamese ambassadors to the US. And they are all very, very optimistic about our relations. And what I'm looking for is you sharing with the young generation of how miracle you have, efforts you have done in order to bring the two countries to where we are now. And with that, I would like to end my speech, and that is one of the other objectives for you in the remaining time of your term. Thank you very much.
Please join me in thanking our three distinguished speakers.
Xin cảm ơn ba người trình bày của chúng ta, và mỗi đóng góp của mọi đóng góp của tất cả có đóng góp về quan hệ của Hoa Kỳ và Việt Nam. Tôi xin mời ngài đại sứ Ambassador, ngài là đại sứ và đại sứ của Campuchia, và ngài bà phó trợ lý ngoại trưởng ngoại giao về Brown về Đông Nam Á của Bộ Ngoại giao Hoa Kỳ. Ông đại sứ Kayo, xin chào mừng ngài tới trở lại Viện Hòa bình Hoa Kỳ. Đây là nhiệm kỳ năm thứ 2 của ngài tại Washington. Trước đó thì là ngài là phó vụ trưởng vụ ASEAN, và là tổng thư ký của chương trình về châu Á, và ông đã ngài trở về Campuchia là cố vấn của hiệu trưởng của trường ngoại giao, và sau đó là thứ trưởng Bộ Ngoại giao, cùng có bà Melissa Brown, phó trợ lý bộ trưởng phụ trách về Đông Nam Á của Bộ Ngoại giao, và cái công việc về biển như là đất liền. Bà đã làm việc tại Jakarta, Singapore và có trải nghiệm tại Việt Nam. Bà gần đây đã cùng với ngài Tổng thống và cả đội của chính phủ Hoa Kỳ đến Việt Nam. Mối quan hệ giữa Lào, Việt Nam, Campuchia, và chúng tôi quan tâm làm sao có cái tiến trình mà chúng tôi thấy được khu vực đã đóng góp vào mỗi nước, và chúng tôi tiếp tục và mong đợi phát triển với quan hệ với các nước. Cảm ơn. Trước hết tôi xin cho phép tôi thể hiện cái sự cảm ơn Viện Hòa bình Hoa Kỳ đã mời tôi tham gia chương trình này. Đây là lần thứ 2 tôi ra chương trình này. Tôi rất hạnh là Campuchia được tham gia vào chương trình về hậu quả chiến tranh và những xây dựng hòa bình. Chúng tôi tiếp tục thì tôi xin chúc mừng Hoa Kỳ và Việt Nam trong quan hệ mới.
The partnership between the two countries. Well, you see, in the U.S., most people know as Vietnam War, but actually the war in that region is included in the whole three countries as Indochina countries. Cambodia has been bombarded, being bombarded since as early as 1968. And that is one of the reasons why the politicians in Cambodia got differences and then led to the breakup and civil war in 1970s. It is one of the reasons from the because the Ho Chi Minh Trail, as the world know, come down and then run adjacent the border of Cambodia. So the bombing, including the yellow agent, also along the trail since 1968 or as early as late 1967, affected the whole people of Cambodian life on 3 or 4 provinces along this border as well. So that is how we very much appreciate the USIP for including Cambodia in this War Legacy program and War Legacy and Peace program. See. For decades of war, 3 decades of war almost, that we enter into the war, it left us with a lot of destruction, but also with the psychological and leftover of landmine and remnant of war, such as the unexploded ordnance and so on. So it leave a trail of victims even after the war completed until 1998 that we implemented the win-win policy that we can abolish and we dismantle all the Khmer Rouge factions, and then we have seen a real peace. That is why we, through our experience, we believe that all war ended, cannot end the war by war. It has to be ended by negotiation and reconciliations and so on. And that is how we believe that the program would help Cambodian as well. The general has talked about recommendations about what we should do. Our previous speaker also talking about this in Vietnam, but I would like to request the U.S. to expand that program to all the 3 countries, because we all received the same effect from the war, which is known as Vietnam War as well. You see, after the war ended, Cambodia has remained around 6 million mines in the 4 to 6 million mines in the countries, which we have to clear. Even till now, we are still doing our most things to clear all the mines for our agricultural farmlands and so on. And from year to year, thousands of people were victim to the landmine and left over by the war. We do believe that landmine and cluster bomb should be considered as the banned weapons and as well as the chemical weapons as well. So this is how we propose that it should be considered this way. Because of achievement in landmine, the Cambodian has done quite well, and that is how we become expert in the region in demining. And we have, from the time of during the mid-90s, that we received assistance from the UN and from the world, including the US, to help us in demining in the area. We become an expert, and now we are participating in the UN peacekeeping as well to demine the area of the infested with landmines and remnants of war. We send our deminer to 9 countries in Africa and in Middle East. And we even now training the Ukrainian deminer in Cambodia to help them to demine the mine in war in Ukraine. We also have cooperated quite well with the US in the field of MIA and POW. Our cooperation has done well, and it remains around 40 remaining of the MIA left inside Cambodia. It remained because the country was locked down because of the COVID during the 2021 and 22, and now we open up again, so we start the cooperation again. So I am not going to talk much on this, but what I would like to put straight a request to the US and to the publics, that the first is that please consider expanding all the program to Cambodia, including education. Our young Cambodian is looking for always values high education from the US. We have a lot of students coming to study in the US on their own parental monies rather than we do have some Fulbright, but it's just a few students that have that Fulbright. The rest of us on their own because they value the value of education here. That's why they send their children here as well. So one of the program, and also the rehabilitation program for the victims, especially victim of the yellow agents, which affected the young born baby as well along those 4 or 5 provinces in the northeastern province and eastern Mekong province. And also the last of our request is that we have left with the debt of war, which we consider as a debt of war, and we would appeal to the US if it converted the debt into humanitarian assistance on these programs. It would be seen as rehabilitation and reconciliation between victims and the US. I thank you.
Thank you very much.
Great. So I have the privilege of being your last speaker, so I better keep it interesting. One thing I will say in my very long title, in reality, where I really focus is across all of Southeast Asia. And often people ask me, why have I focused my whole career in Southeast Asia? And I'll tell you, it's exactly because of what we're discussing today. It's the idea that you can still be so forward-leaning and look to the future while also paying great respect and learning from the lessons of the past. So when I think about Vietnam, of course, we're still riding the high of the president's visit, and it truly was just such an honor to be part of it, and so much hard work to get there, but really proud of what we accomplished. Then when it comes to Laos, they're taking on the ASEAN chairmanship. This is a really a big role for any ASEAN member state, but looking ahead when we have the continued war in Ukraine, when we have the escalating crisis in Burma and how to deal with that, it's a really big responsibility. And then when it comes to Cambodia, we've got a new prime minister. We've got a lot of opportunity to do new things and continue to build on our success. I also have a soft spot for Cambodia because Khmer was my first language I learned in the Foreign Service. And for those of you who speak Khmer, you know that that is not an easy feat, just like Vietnamese. It's a very difficult language. So there was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to accomplish that. But so I thought I would focus, since we had so many other esteemed colleagues on the panel focusing on Vietnam, talk a little bit more about Cambodia and about Laos as well. I will note that throughout the whole planning for the upgrade to the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership for Vietnam, there was constant discussion about needing to honor the foundation that legacy issues offered. It's the very reason we were able to upgrade, because we had made so much progress and done so much together. So one thing, as high-level officials working on Vietnam, we often have to brief our principals to remind them that we haven't put everything behind us. Part of our future is acknowledging that our past still matters and that there's no need to forget the past. In fact, we need to make sure that we continue to acknowledge and recognize that. But turning more across the region more broadly, we have spent, the United States, more than $665 million US across the region since 1993 to focus on UXO. The goal there is, of course, to remove the dangerous items and then help those communities be able to heal and be able to grow. But of course, the reason that we're able to do so much is because the people of Cambodia, the people of Laos, and the people of Vietnam, they're the ones who are doing this work day in, day out of finding and clearing those landmines in the UXO. I certainly can say that their dedication is truly inspiring. The continued partnership that we have with Cambodia, with Laos, with Vietnam is the reason that the United States has been able to provide such substantial levels of funding to our UXO programs across the region. Just last year, we provided more than $80 million to address UXO issues in these three countries. And of course, funding matters, but it's not the only way that we can have an impact. I think it's always important to step back and think that our goal is for people to live safely and let them live in peace. Let's talk about Cambodia first a little bit more in detail. We have been working since 1993 on both UXO and landmine contamination issues. Over the past 30 years, we've invested $190 million to conduct surveys, to clear mines and UXO, and also to build national capacity. My understanding is Cambodia is aiming to be mine-free by 2025, yes. Which we know is right around the corner. And so the goal is for us to partner together to continue to address war legacy issues, including the reduction of UXO contamination, but also, as the ambassador noted, accounting for missing US service members. We fund a number of implementing partners. We've got friends at the Mines Advisory Group, at HALO, H-A-L-O. I know you're out there. I'm blinded by the light, but you're in the crowd or on screen. Cambodia has also quite a significant internationally recognized capacity in the Cambodia Mine Action and Victims Assistance Authority, and then also the Cambodia Mine Action Center. I think we've seen really significant progress for survey and clearance objectives in Cambodia. I think the really close cooperation that our two countries have really enabled us to make a ton of progress over recent years. When it comes to POW and MIA accounting in Cambodia, we have 42 of 90 Americans that now have been repatriated and identified. The work of our defense POW MIA accounting agency enables us to continue to pursue these leads that are associated with the remaining 48 individuals unaccounted for. And a big thank you to the Cambodian government for your partnership there. With Laos, since I'm sharing personal anecdotes, I was, I guess, one of the longest visitors our embassy had in Laos, and I managed to go to 4 provinces over 4 days. But it was in particular, was a remarkable time to visit to Xinjiang province in Laos, which is, many of you know, the most heavily, I guess, they face the greatest number of unexploded ordnances across all 3 countries. And it's really underdeveloped province, but really remarkable to see the partnership there. Just a true example of reconciliation in action. One of the most interesting parts that I found was the implementing organization who was doing the demining. Most of their crew to the site, we drove about 2 hours outside of the provincial capital, and they were showing us the work they were doing on a cattle farm. And it was nearly all women, but adding to that, nearly all of the women had worked in the kitchen and eventually worked their way up through the organization to continue to be elevated to positions of more and more authority. They ran a very tight ship. They ordered me around. I followed all the instructions to stay safe, but it was really inspiring. And then later that afternoon, I also got to see a session where they would bring villagers to the school, and it was interesting to see the young people teaching the older people about what to do if they were to come across something that looked suspicious. But Laos more broadly, we've spent $355 million to clear and dispose of UXO since we started there back in 1995. We've really tried to increase our funding over the last 5 years. I was really privileged to join our then Deputy Secretary of State, Wendy Sherman, for her trip to Laos, separate trip, where we were able to launch another $45 million to the UXO efforts. And so that has enabled us to work in 5 of 6 provinces where UXO remained to be such an issue. We're hoping that we will transition from a mix of survey and clearance to full clearance by the end of 2023 in all 5 of these provinces. And then we expect to more than double the US-funded clearance capacity by the end of the year to just over 200 clearance teams in those 5 provinces. I'll say for those of you who've worked in Laos, it's also really amazing to see in these small communities the impact of this type of work. But to wrap it up, in conclusion, I think, again, what's so exciting about working on these 3 countries is the ability to measure your progress and to see things change before your very eyes. Ambassador Napper's heard me share before that I was on the Vietnam desk, I guess more than 15 years ago. And what's most remarkable is I was part of the effort to shift US policy on Agent Orange, where before we weren't undertaking dioxin remediation, and now look at where we've come, where we're working hand in hand and jointly cleaning up the dioxin and continuing to contribute more money. So again, I hope you all, I recognize all the great work, all the great conversations over the past 2 days. It's just, I hope you share the same enthusiasm. It's pretty amazing to be able to look forward and back at the same time and feel optimistic, see what else we can achieve by continuing to work closely together. I can say that the United States has their eye very focused on Vietnam, on Cambodia, on Laos, and war legacy will continue to be an issue that we will never fully put behind us. It will only make our partnership stronger. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Maybe we can get to everything.
Thank you, Your Excellency. So we actually have an encore. For those of you who were with us this morning in the session on the U.S.-Vietnam Youth Leadership Cohort, USIP has been cooperating with Fulbright University Vietnam for the last year on an online youth dialogue project between American and Vietnamese young people. We've invited two of the participants in that youth leadership cohort to join us today and share about their experiences. Tommy Nguyen comes from California. Andy Tamuziak is a student here in DC. So for the last few minutes we have in our dialogue, please listen to their experiences and how does this contribute to the future of our relationship that we've just heard the ambassadors and distinguished speakers describe.
I'll start first. Well, hello beautiful people. Xin chào mọi người đẹp. I just want to give a shout out to all the past amazing speakers, from ambassadors, the diplomats, the people doing the hard work. And USIP decided to put the two most inexperienced people at the very end to close off. So very, very excited to do that. Once again, my name is Tommy Nguyen. I was born in Vietnam, but I was made in America. My family fled to the United States in the 1990s under the HO program, which was a program that allowed South Vietnamese veterans who were re-educated for more than 3 months refugee status to the United States. As a result of that, Vietnam became not a place where I grew up and where I formed my identity, rather a place of stories. Stories from my family, stories from American media, a little bit from the American education system. It was a country that I knew so little about, yet felt so connected to. All my life, my family told me stories to remember, to never forget about the atrocities and trauma that they faced. And I thought remembering was a very straightforward action. There's a quote from a professor from USC who was my mentor, Viet Thanh Nguyen, that there are two battles in war, one in the battleground and one in our memories. And the war may be long gone, way before I was born, but the battle still remains in our memory, in our souls and spirits. And I'm in no position to judge people on how to remember or the history. But I feel like I can decide how to remember. And for me, personally, I chose love. Love for my country, for Vietnam and the United States. Love for people, love for trying to remember and understand. And that was the reason why I decided to partake in both the youth cohort program for the USIP and also the Fulbright Vietnam program last year as an English teaching assistant and a cultural ambassador. All I ever wanted was to see Vietnam through my own eyes. Not from my parents, not from the lens of war and trauma, but through my own experiences, mistakes, and challenges. And that's exactly what happened. The interesting part, though, was when I got in, I requested to be down south to get to know South Vietnam. And for better or worse, I got placed in Lang Son, Vietnam, which is 10 kilometers from the border of China in a very northern region in Vietnam. And I was scared because no one in my family had ever gone to the north. Obviously, my family history puts me in a very vulnerable position, and I come from a family that grew up in Orange County, in Little Saigon, that had very strong conceptions about the north. But here I am, in a rental car on my way to Gifted High School, Chu Van An in Lang Son. It ended up being the most amazing experience of my life. I met people who were so loving, so hospitable, who showed me a Vietnam that was so different from the movies and the oral histories that I learned about. My students were my greatest joy. I was one of the first foreigners, Americans, native English speakers that they met, and they saw me as a science experiment, as if an alien abducted one of their friends, took them to another world, and brought them back. That's how different I was to them. But they were so amazing, so smart, and for me, makes me so hopeful for what Vietnam will be. And I wasn't the only one in this program who was Vietnamese American searching these questions. The majority of Fulbrighters were Vietnamese Americans, categorized as heritage-seeking applicants. That wasn't the case 20, 25 years ago, and that's something that should be celebrated. My job was about cultural exchange and education, talking about America through my eyes. But for that to happen, I had to have the hard conversation what that meant to be Vietnamese American. It was so interesting because I thought I would have to find a way to be navigating kind of the rules in Vietnam and trying to figure out a way to discuss that. But my first day in class, one of my students said, teacher, tell me all about the Vietnam War. Are you an anti-communist? And I was like, man, you're really putting me in a really tough position right now. But it's important, those hard conversations, because that's what we're leading to. It's peace. That's true peace, having these tough conversations that are necessary, this open dialogue. And for me, that's the most important part in terms of next steps when we talk about a reconciliation framework of having an open space and dialogue to include South Vietnamese narratives. Because South Vietnamese culture is Vietnamese culture, from Paris by night to the remittances and support from the diasporic Vietnamese community. It's already a part of Vietnam, just not yet in our educational systems. I feel like a lot of the conflicts that occur between the diasporic community in Vietnam comes from a lack of understanding. So we need open spaces where we can talk and carry about our experiences. In terms of specifics, following models like Fulbright University, for example, that encourages an open dialogue to talk about the Vietnamese American refugee experience, about boat people, about the war, in a way where we can feel safe and add to the diversity to Vietnam. And the United States also has a lot of work to do on their end as well, in terms of decentralizing the American experience and advocating for different voices from not only Vietnamese Americans, but the Hmong people and the ethnic minorities that serve the United States just as patriotically. And also investment into Vietnamese Americans like myself. The Fulbright experience changed my life. Whenever I think of Vietnam, I don't think about the war or the trauma. I think about my students. I think about the karaoke nights when we ate, bánh mì nướng or bánh tráng or vịt quay, which is like the specialty in Lang Son. I think about all those memories. But it shouldn't be as exclusive as the Fulbright program or these academic conferences. It should be something that requires investment from both the United States and Vietnam to promote Vietnamese language classes for the diaspora community that still struggle with their Vietnamese, including myself, because I still sound like a baby in Vietnamese, to opening up Vietnamese American education centers in Vietnam that incorporate the Vietnamese American history into Vietnam. It's a tough battle. It's a hard conversation to have. For me, it's also very fun. My whole time in Vietnam talking about these issues, every time I had these intense debates with my students, it was always from a place of love and understanding. And I hope I can continue to do that through the youth cohort program, and I have been through USIP. I'm just so excited for what's next.
Thanks a lot, Tommy. Andy?
Thank you. That was wonderful to hear from you, Tommy. I really enjoyed that. And if I could just first say, I was here in May for PeaceCon at USIP, and I never imagined that in my career I would get a chance to sit on this stage, let alone later the same year. So I'm incredibly honored to be here among such a distinguished panel of speakers who've dedicated so much to the U.S.-Vietnam relationship. My story is very different from Tommy's. I was born in 2001. I grew up in Boulder, Colorado. My mother is American of Italian descent. My father's Canadian of Polish-Ukrainian descent. My mom grew up in Louisville, Kentucky, and had two half-brothers that enlisted in the Navy during the Vietnam War. Neither served on the ground and thankfully returned from the war uninjured. So in my childhood, discussions about the war didn't figure very prominently whatsoever. I learned about the war in bits and pieces, and I think in this way our experiences overlap somewhat. Our knowledge of the Vietnam War is made up of a piecemeal collage of stories, media, films, music, textbooks, and I think this is common among many young people born after reconciliation began without direct experience with the war. But despite this detached experience of many young people have an outsized impact on the outcome of reconciliation. to jump back to the quote Tommy mentioned from Viet Thanh Nguyen, which I find very influential as well. It's true that wars are fought once on the battlefield and again in memory, but I think that the population that participates in the war in memory tends to be much larger than that group that ever participated personally. So to continue promoting peace in the long term, I believe it's essential that we invite and encourage participation in peace building from a generation that doesn't know the war in the way that those who began the reconciliation process do. And that's what inspired me to join this cohort. Youth involvement in reconciliation, I believe, is especially important now because of the timing. As we approach 50 years since the end of the war, efforts are ongoing, as others have mentioned, to redress the harm done by Agent Orange, remove UXO, and return remains of those missing in action. But the numbers of people with direct experience with the war are diminishing. I had the chance to go this spring to the Vietnam Veterans Memorial here down on the National Mall for Memorial Day. It was my first experience doing that. And to see the commemoration process. What I found was a very dedicated group of veterans and their families who come on an annual basis to pay tribute. I also noticed a lot of empty seats and few young faces amidst the crowd. So this creates a difficult question for those hoping to involve young people in this reconciliation process, which is how do you encourage participation and care about an issue which many young people don't have direct experience with. And this kind of set the context for my group's project within the cohort. I'm in the memorialization group. So when we were initially brainstorming about how to approach this, the first thing we asked ourselves is, what is the first thing students think about when they're asked what they know about the other country? And between the Vietnamese and American participants in our group, the thing we agreed on was that war and its brutality is the first thing that comes to mind for many students who may not have much experience outside the classroom. This inspired us to investigate more about how the war has been memorialized. And the National Monument Audit, which records over 2,200 different memorials to the Vietnam War here in the US, of those, only about 189 mention the word peace, and none mention reconciliation. This conflict, because of the length and trauma that it's imposed, as well as the extent and quality of the reconciliation, the process that followed, makes this a unique opportunity, I think, to explore the possibility of shifting our focus and memorializing peace on a large scale. As memorials have tremendous power to influence emotions, using memorialization to emphasize the remarkable and hard-fought gains, hard-fought nature of the reconciliation process, I believe can help strengthen people's commitment to learning more about each other and building meaningful relationships. I think it's important to note, though, that such an approach wouldn't seek to downplay the significance of the war, but rather contextualize it with the remarkable reconciliation process that's followed. This process should not diminish at all the trauma or harm suffered by victims of the war, but rather seek to honor them by opening a door to a future of peace and enduring relationships where never again isn't just a saying, but a reality. Of course, not all young people will become experts on the history of U.S.-Vietnam relations. I'm the furthest thing from that. But I believe that increased knowledge about the reconciliation process through physical memorials to peace, through educational curriculum, art, film, and other creative approaches will invite future generations to participate in writing a new chapter in the U.S.-Vietnam relationship, whether it means involvement at the community level, in travel, business, educational exchange like Fulbright. So I'm incredibly honored to be a part of this cohort. I've learned so much from the experience, and I'm grateful to learn about this process. Thank you.
Great. Thank you both for being here. It's amazing. Thanks to Tommy and Andy and all of our speakers, as well as moderators throughout the last day and a half. I think you all have put it more eloquently than I can about the meaning of reconciliation, the process that we're going through, the need to build relationships among people and have a vision of the future. And that's what we were aiming to do here at USIP, is to bring together diplomats, military veterans, young people, Vietnamese and Southeast Asian Americans, to share our own ideas and visions of how we can contribute to building partnerships and peace among our countries. So again, thanks everyone for being here, and we'll see you again next year.